Right now, mineral. Grass changes with the season. Shouldn't your mineral?
Good evening. My name is Caitlin Brandt, Events and Industry Partnership Manager for the American Angus Association. We're excited to have you join us tonight for the latest installment of the Angus University webinar series, Evolution of the Cow, Evolution of Nutrition. With us here tonight is Cargill team member Wesley Moore. Wesley grew up on a cow-calf operation in South Central Missouri. He received his bachelor's in animal science and his master's degree in ruminant nutrition from the University of Missouri. Since March of 2018, he has been a member of the Cargill beef business in North America, where he and the Cargill team work with their producers and customers to develop diets based on the specific needs of their customers' cattle. But before we get going, I would like to make our viewers aware that if you have a question at any point in time throughout this webinar, that you click the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, type in your question, and hit submit. We'll compile those questions and get to them at the end of the presentation. Wesley, the floor is yours.
All righty. Caitlin, thank you for the introduction. It's great to be here with you tonight, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Not coming at you with a whole lot of answers, hoping to provoke some thought around the nutrient requirement of your cows based on the performance and productivity you've bred for throughout the year. And so, how has a cow changed? I think that's an important question because a lot of times if we live it day to day, making genetic selection, we don't always realize 10 years what kind of progress we've made. But I think if we look back at our industry, we've seen a lot of change occur in the last several years. And so, for instance, we've increased carcass weight on average about 6 pounds a year since the 1970s. And so if you look at 50 years, we're producing gigantic carcasses compared to where they were in the 70s. One thing we've done is we've improved quality grades. So if we looked in 2009, cattle were killing less than 70% choice or higher. In 2020, it's getting pretty close to every calf is killing a quality grade choice or higher. And having said that, in this process, we've also reduced our environmental footprint as an industry, all to meet the demand of our consumer and increase the value of beef along the way. And I must say we've done a pretty nice job of increasing the value of beef. So if we look at the retail equivalent value of U.S. beef produced in billions of dollars, you can see here the actual numbers aren't that important, but we've seen good steady growth, meaning we're producing just as much beef as we ever had, and our consumer is willing to pay more for that beef at the retail location. And so I think that says we've listened to our customer and done a good job. So look back, how have we achieved this? So if we look specifically at marbling, right, we started breeding for marbling in the early 2000s, and guess what? We got marbling. Not only that, it can't give all the credit to genetics, so we've made nutritional improvements along the way as well. Whereas we market a lot of cattle on a grid today, and we didn't prior to that or in a live cattle business. And so we've changed our endpoint management and feeding practices along the way. Another perfect example here, we've seen the growth in carcass weights throughout the years. We started selecting for growth and specifically carcass weight in the early 90s, and guess what? We developed a lot bigger carcasses. So this means less environmental footprints by increasing productivity or beef produced per animal. On top of that, nutrition and technology have changed as well. So if we looked at the implementation of implants or beta agonists or other nutritional technology that we've used to increase finish weight of kill cattle. But all that is just to say, how has our cow changed? Because sometimes I think we don't do a good job of going back and asking this question. So we've come a long way since the 50s where, the average cow was probably 700 pounds. And I think the probably the most obvious answer first is our cow has gotten bigger. If we look at kill cow carcass weight from 74 to 2018 and adjust that to a live weight basis, we've seen almost a 400-pound increase in those cows that we're killing. Now, granted, these are cull cows, so this is a lagging indicator. So these weights could change. I have seen more attention being given to mature weight of cows, and so we may not be pushing weights near as much as we once were. But if we imagine a 1,400-pound cow on average 10 years ago, if she lasted 10 years for us, where does that put our cow weight today? Another example of maybe what selection for customer-focused traits has done to our cow is we produce more milk. And that's pretty clear if we look at genetic trends and EPDs, at least in the Angus breed. And you'll see this in every other breed that's out there, but we produce substantially more milk. What does that mean? So I'm biased, but from a nutrient standpoint, that's going to mean that your cow needs more groceries to perform at a higher level. So it's pretty obvious 400 pounds of mature weight means we've got 400 pounds more body weight to maintain. So that drives energy and protein and dry matter intake requirements higher. But the other thing, if we have selected for milk, and on average I believe we have, we increase demands for energy not only during lactation but outside of lactation, specifically for maintenance of organ tissue. And in this example, you can see I've just simply run the nutrient requirements of a 1,000-pound low milk cow versus the nutrient requirements of a 1,400-pound high milk cow. And you can see here, because she's bigger, she is capable of eating more. But don't let that fool you, because I think our highly productive cows today aren't capable of eating through whatever mess we throw at them. So if for instance, if we see a 40% increase in dry matter intake, we see a 50% increase in protein requirement and an 88% increase in energy requirement. And that's for this, and that is based on the same forage base, just for a different cow at a different size and different productivity levels. So after looking at that, I'd probably ask the toughest question: what has changed in your nutrition program? And I'd like you to think about that as we discuss the rest of this. So have you experienced changes in grass on your operation? I mean, I understand some people have moved to improved pastures to try to keep highly vegetative forage in front of those cows all the time. But in most cases, in the commercial setting, our cows are grazing the same pastures and grass that they were grazing in the 1970s. So let that sink in for a second. Our cow, that same cow that we perhaps have increased protein requirements by 40% and increased energy requirements by 80%, is grazing that same forage and knowing that she can't eat through that. So she can't eat enough extra to consume enough calories to maintain. And so what else have you changed? Has there been a change in environment? And I put this up there jokingly, but not unless you believe in global warming. I don't think in general our environment differs so much year to year. I don't know if it trends one way or another, but I would say we've got that cow in a similar type environment that we had her before, whenever she was much smaller and much less productive. Is there any changes on your operation in animal husbandry? Meaning, are you spending more time in providing TLC to those cows? And I would argue, if you look at farmer and rancher statistics, that, you know, us people in the ag industry producing cattle are becoming fewer and further between at the same time that we're producing more beef and having more labor struggles. So I would argue, in general, I don't have the data, but in general, these animals are probably getting less attention, not more. So what happens if we take that same cow and shove a highly productive cow into the same environment that we've been using for the last 40 years? So here's some research out of Tennessee where they classified cows as low, moderate, or high milk producers via actual milk collection. and then ran those cows through a normal synced timed AI program, and then also through a 60-day breeding season. And you can see here, I'm not saying that we need to breed for very low milk production. I think there's a level that fits each particular environment. But as you can see, at least on fescue pasture here, in those high milk producing cows, we saw a significant reduction in both AI pregnancy rate and 60-day breeding season preg rate. So I think this study really points to the fact of, okay, so we've got a more productive cow. We've got this more productive cow in the same environment that a less productive cow was in. So what does that mean for our nutrition program, or what do we need to change in our nutrition program? I think unless we want more cows falling out of the herd or a 20% cull rate, I think for me, and again, I'm biased as a nutritionist, but I think that we really need to feed that cow better to reach your genetic potential. And speaking specifically of genetic potential, here's an example of some weaning weight data that was analyzed out of Oklahoma State, where we can see that this cow, our weaning weight, our forecasted delivery weight, I believe this is based on auction data and superior auction data. But as you can see here, our implants are still working, so that's good to know. But if you look over at, let's say 2005, 2006, we really start to plateau in the weaning weight that we're producing from those cows. And again, if we went way back to the beginning, we could see that those cows have continued to get bigger through that same stretch of time. And so costs are continuing to go up, but revenue isn't always continuing to go up in every operation. And I think that's because in some situations, our cow is actually outpacing our nutrient environment that we're putting her in, and thus we're not getting her full or optimal performance. And I think we can see these trends in the example we used in preg rates, and also here in weaning weight trends throughout the year. So just some food for thought there. But what happens when we have better genetics and the same performance? So have genetics exceeded our environment's capability? And I think these are tough questions to ask, but from a pure profitability standpoint, especially on the commercial side, I think these are things we need to be challenging ourselves with. And then, are we focused on the consumer preference and not fitting our cows to their environment? Again, this is a fine line to walk. If you look at our history, quality grade, carcass weight, environmental impact, we've been doing a lot that our consumer is asking for. We've drastically increased the amount of prime beef available on the market, certified Angus beef, and we've realized that our customer is willing to pay more for that. But at the end of the day, at what point in time from a cow-calf standpoint do we need to become more cost focused and start looking at fitting some of those genetics, choosing some genetics that fit our environment better? Or on the flip side of that, increasing our game in our nutrition program or our nutrient budget for that cow to compensate for our increased performance. And the last question I have here is nutrition holding back performance of the cow-calf segment. I would argue if we look at weaning weight trend data, and it's not all the same. That was for the northwestern U.S., the data we looked at. It's not the same in the Midwest, and it's not the same in the Southwest, but I think there is noticeable plateaus or lulls in the weaning weight that we're producing, all at the same time where our cow weights have continued to go up. And so speaking from a nutrient aspect or a nutrient requirement standpoint, we've got a cow consuming more forage, more pasture, requiring more acres, and producing the same pounds of weaned calf. And we really need to challenge that train of thought as we look at business planning, genetic selection, nutrient requirements going forward. So in summary, nutritional challenges in the last 20 years. So we've added 120 pounds of carcass weight in 20 years. So we're in 2021, so we've added 120 pounds of carcass weight since 2000. And that's drastic improvements in the amount of beef produced per cow exposed to breeding. However, the cow-calf producer may not be seeing all those returns. Increased milk production by 47%. And so that's specifically looking at the Angus breed, but I think that trend is going to be very similar across multiple breeds. And that means that we've got a cow that needs more groceries, she needs more calories and protein to maintain herself, to get bred back, and to produce a heavy weaning weight. We've almost doubled the percent prime carcasses that we produce, which has really helped drive that original value discussion we were having, where our consumer is willing to spend more for higher production of beef and maintain that pace as an industry. At the same time, we've observed stagnant weaning weights and reproductive rates. So I would challenge the group listening here, are we keeping nutrition where it needs to be? Or could our nutrition program improve? And I don't want it to sound like I'm challenging beef producers specifically, because I think the industry as a whole has kind of lagged behind the growing nutrient requirements for the genetics that our consumer is asking for. For instance, the NRC that I used, the 2000 NRC, on average, the citations behind the section on mineral requirements for beef cattle are almost 23 years old. So we saw, based in those previous slides, how much the cow has evolved in 23 years, right? She's producing almost 50% more milk, 120 pounds more carcass weight in the calves that she produces. And so we really probably need to be challenging this as an industry, not as just cow-calf producers, but as an industry. And what do our highly productive cows today truly require? And are the calculations or nutrient requirements we use adequate to meet our needs? And I think that's something we don't have a clear answer for, but it is something I would challenge the industry as a whole to work on, because a lot of our research anymore is pretty advanced, but a lot of our numbers we use, for instance, for calcium and phosphorus requirements of cows, a lot of that data was established 50 years ago, and we still use those same models or similar ones to determine that. So that's a specific example there, but I would say pretty big thing to think about as we look at what nutrients your cows need. And perhaps as a nutritional support industry, we have focused a little bit too much on preventing deficiency symptoms. I mean, that's what the NRC is truly built around. It's not around optimizing or maximizing performance. It's focused on reduction or absence of deficiency, and assuming that meets the requirement of that cow. So a couple challenges I have there for the industry, both as producers, myself as a nutritional consultant, our researchers out there that may be watching, some things to take note of there. So what's the answer to all this? And the truth is, I don't know, and I'm not sure we have anybody in our industry that does know. What I do know is that we've changed the cow, and her requirements have probably changed with her, and I don't always believe that her intake has been able to outpace her demands for calories or protein or whatever nutrient we want to discuss. Next, we do know that the same grass on the same farm under the same management practices doesn't change. So if we're sticking this more productive cow into the same environment that she would have seen 50 years ago, how can we expect different results from her? And stagnant weaning weight and potentially revenue on our operations, along with increased costs, tells us that something isn't adding up. And as an industry, I think we need to figure out what that might be. A at Cargill, we talk a lot amongst ourselves about the need to have a healthy dissatisfaction for the status quo. I get to hear that once or twice a week, it seems like. And I think those are the right kinds of challenges we need to be making on our operations is we love tradition, we love history, we love legacy of our operation, but we haven't thought that way as we've selected for our genetics. So why should we think that way in our nutrition program? I know a lot of operations today that cows are grazing the same grass. They get hay put up in the same way that it was put up 20 years ago. But at the same time, that cow is producing a lot more than she was 20 years ago. And so, good challenge there. This is the perfect cow. So if we think of our highly productive cow today, what does it mean for her to be perfect, right? Well, from an economic scale or a bookkeeping scale, we still expect that cow to have a calf every calendar year. And I stole this slide from a colleague of mine, and I haven't been able to put together a presentation without using it since, because I think it really sums up an illustration of what we're expecting out of these cows, especially these highly productive cows of today that are raised in the same environment that they were 30 years ago. So when it comes down to it, the perfect cow has about 24 hours to become successful on our operation. 24 hours of a year, so 365 days a year, is her opportunity to get rebred. And so that seems like a really small window, right? And that's because it is. But if you dial right down to it, by the time she gestates, by the time she calves, by the time that her reproductive tissue or reproductive organs recover and she's capable of becoming bred again, a lot of times she has a 40-day window or less to achieve getting pregnant. And so in this window, it's a good chance that she's going to have 2 periods of standing estrus, 12 hours apiece. And so if we dial that all the way down, a successful cow or a perfect cow has the opportunity to rebreed 1 day a year. And what this says to me as a nutritionist is, we've learned this in a lot of fetal programming research, that nutrition can influence lifelong calf productivity, organ development, clear up into the first trimester. And so I think what we really need to focus on from a practical standpoint is the perfect cow needs perfect nutrition all the time. And that's not always the case. We don't know what the nutrient content of the grass is day to day or season to season, really. But I think there's parameters we can use to manage that and effectively provide feedback to our nutrition program to make adjustments accordingly. So what if we look at the needs of the perfect cow? And I've talked a lot about protein and energy requirements, very little on vitamins, minerals, but we know these are all important, right? So if we look at those low priority traits in a cow herd and that perfect cow, they really become high priority line items for our bottom line. And so fertility is heavily influenced by phosphorus, copper, zinc, selenium. Fetal development, again, copper, zinc, selenium, you'll see those 3 listed as important nutrients everywhere. Disease resistance, which is a huge issue if we look at respiratory disease and what it costs the industry, anaplasmosis, things of that nature. But outside of calories and protein, vitamins and minerals are extremely critical to optimize or maximize performance out of our highly productive cow today. But I would say if we started with the basics, it really all comes down to what kind of shape is she in, what kind of care are we taking of that cow. And so this is some older data from 94, but a compilation of data here. You can see that as body condition score goes up, whether it's at calving, breeding, or preg testing, so does pregnancy rate. And so if we take one thing away, it's the same message we had on the perfect cow. It's that this body condition score we can never afford to let this cow slip a body condition score. Regardless of what our feed resources are or our nutrient budgets, we've got to do what it takes to take care of this cow so she can in turn take care of us or our checkbook. And so what does that mean? It means first we've got to know our cow. So I like challenging producers in my day-to-day activities on farms and working with ranchers is asking them what their cows weigh. You would be shockingly surprised the number of operations that still truly believe that their cow weighs 1,200 pounds. And I would say on average, if you looked at the data, we're much closer to a 1,500 pound cow than we are a 1,200 pound cow. And we can't do a good job as nutritionists or nutrition providers of feeding your cow unless we know what she weighs first. How much milk does she produce? Again, we can look at trends, but we all know that genetic potential for milk production varies a lot depending on what genetics lines you've used. And so how much milk do you produce? How big of a calf does she wean? Those are all questions that are going to feed into developing what your nutrition program needs to look like. How is she reproducing? So that's another question that not a lot of operations have answers to. So we need to know all these things before we can put together a holistic nutrition program that works on your operation with your forage base and in your environment. And so the last question that it's surprising to me, very few people know, is how many pounds of weaned calf does she produce per year? Or how many pounds of weaned calf do you produce per pound of cow exposed? Whatever performance metrics you prefer on your operation, I think it's absolutely critical that we know these measures as we drive our business and make decisions. And I'm not always sure that a majority of the time we do know. So next thing, we've got to know your environment. And so I work in a region, I pretty well kind of cover the fescue belt for our pasture team here in the US. And so I get to see a lot of different geographies that, although they've got fescue in them as the primary forage, the same cow doesn't fit in North Georgia as the same cow in northern Missouri. And so we've got to know our environment, and also we've got to know when our forages are best and when they're the worst. And so when should we calve compared to our natural nutrient resources? Or do we have a compelling enough marketing strategy that it doesn't matter when she calves compared to what our natural best nutrient sources are? For instance, here in Missouri, we've moved a lot from spring to fall calving probably over the last 20 years. If we look at the optimal times to graze fescue, they don't match up anywhere near where the peak nutrient requirements of a fall calving cow are. So our best nutrition when grazing fescue is typically going to be that April and May timeframe, whereas that cow is going to have her peak nutrient requirements during lactation probably in December or January when we're getting hit the hardest by winter. And so the compelling argument for that is on average calves are probably $50 to $70 higher in April when you're weaning those fall-born calves, and there's going to be enough compelling information that some producers choose to go to fall calving. And so that's just an example of when should we calve compared to our natural nutrient resources. So what are your limitations or advantages? And I say this as a Midwestern nutritionist by heart. So can you grow corn silage? Are you close to an ethanol plant or cheap corn? Does your cow live on cactus? And so I say that last one jokingly because I don't get to cover any areas where cows live on cactus, but I think in parts of Arizona and New Mexico, that might be a luxury in their diet. But does a high-performing, highly productive cow fit our environment? And can we grow the on-farm resources that she needs to maximize her performance? Can we purchase those nutrients from off-farm? Or do we need to look at fitting a lower producing cow that'll still wean a calf in our environment? Those are challenges I would like to make to the group here. And I think we really got to do a good job or a better job of knowing our situation. And it starts by knowing our performance numbers. So what is your situation? Do you currently have good performance? Are you getting 95% of your cows bred every year and you're trying to get to 97? Or are you having a 78% pregnancy rate and really wondering how your neighbors are getting 85, 87 year in, year out? If you do have poor performance and need help figuring it out, I think there's good resources to pull from the industry. And so I think lastly, it all comes down to profitability. I'm a little bit biased and can be single track minded, but I think all in all, we need to be making the most profitable decisions. Sure, we need to keep in mind what's important to our consumer, what's important to our downstream users of beef, for instance, the feedlot and the packer. But also, I think we need to keep in mind what fits my resources. How can I optimize or maximize my profitability by finding the optimum cow? And so I think lastly, it takes a team. In most situations, we can't be afraid to ask for help. If you don't understand nutrition or you don't understand reproduction, there's lots of good experts out there that know that like the back of their hand and are willing to help you on your operation. Just make sure you find the right person with your best interest in mind. And so I think the conversation should be focused on profitability of your operation. And if it's focused on product or a transactional price, perhaps that's not always the best situation to improve your operation. But I know there's lots of really good, helpful people out there in the industry that are just there to help you along. And so with that, I hope if nothing else, I stimulated some interest or some thought around the evolution of your cow's nutrient requirements. Would like to thank the Angus Association for having us out and joining in this partnership with us, we left plenty of time for questions, so I hope there's some good ones that have cycled in.
Yeah, I guess it seems like a no-brainer that the way we feed cows today should not be the same as our parents and our grandparents have done it in the past. But I would venture to say there's quite a few people that are listening that have done it just because they've always done it that way. So with that, we are going to open it for some questions. Hopefully they can ask you how to change that. And I'm going to remind the audience, if you have any questions, hit that question and answer button at the bottom of your screen and submit that, and we will get to it shortly. So the first question is, what is the most important time of year for you to pay attention to nutrition in your cow herd?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. If we look at the perfect cow, there's never an opportunity to skimp. Having said that, we know when forages are the best in our geography. So let's say we're in May and June on warm season grass or April and May. A lot of times there is reason to get lax so we can focus on other aspects of our operation. Having said that, I think the primary influx point is when we're making those winter feeds or winter forages that we're planning to feed our cows for 150 days. A lot of times I don't see enough focus there. And so I would say there's never a good time to go lax on a cow. But if there is a time to heighten our awareness around our nutrition program, it's when we're making those forages. So that day in May or June when you're baling fescue, hopefully not July or August, that day doing everything right, knowing that bale of hay is going to influence some cow for 150 days this year.
Yeah. How does creep feeding affect the nutritional requirements of the cow? Or does it?
So creep feeding in general has very little impact on the nutrient requirements of a cow. Mm-hmm. Because what we see is when we creep feed, obviously it boosts our weaning weight, right? And that's a given. But it does that by providing additional nutrients, not necessarily taking any pull off of the cow. So milk production is pretty similar. The only advantage it does have is in a tight forage situation, it can reduce some forage that was consumed for the cow and leave it for, or consumed by the calf and leave it for the cow. But it has very little influence on the nutrient requirements of the cow.
Yeah. We talked about this a little bit earlier, you and I, but is dry matter intake more important, or is it the protein and the calories that they consume?
It's the combination. It's a matrix, if you could imagine. So everything interacts. So maximizing dry matter intake is extremely critical, but it takes adequate protein and calorie intake to maximize dry matter intake. So if we look at areas in the west or the southwest where they're primarily warm season grass based, those cows don't consume adequate protein. So for instance, a mid-gestation cow without protein supplement could consume as low as 1.5% of her body weight dry matter. When she is more than capable, her GI tract is more than capable of consuming 2.3. And so it's optimizing dry matter intake with proper protein and calorie nutrition that's important.
Gotcha. What mature weight do you think is the most efficient for a beef cow?
It really depends on your environment.
Yeah.
If we've got improved pastures, let's say we've got a wheat, ryegrass, Sudan grass rotation that the cow's grazing, and she's got corn silage all winter long, I don't know if you can make them too big.
Yeah.
But like our cow pictured there eating on a cactus, I think that cow can definitely be too big.
Yeah.
And I don't know that, as long as you're willing to put the resources into them to maintain them, they can be as big as you want. But we've got to understand that with the bigger cow comes more cost. And if we're not achieving more revenue with that bigger cow, we really need to challenge our business model.
Yeah. Can you explain, and we talked about this a little bit when you had the perfect cow chart up there, but can you explain the changes in those requirements for a cow in trimesters of pregnancy versus when she has a calf at side?
Yeah, so I think trimesters of pregnancy, so production stage of the cow influences her nutrient requirements, as does influence her dry matter intake. And so, like we talked in the previous question, those, everything runs in tandem. So that's why we've got to provide balanced nutrition. But as that cow progresses through pregnancy, she typically eats less dry matter. However, towards the end of pregnancy, her intake will start ramping up. But if we look at a mid-gestation cow, she's probably consuming 2% of her body weight on a dry basis, whereas a peak lactation cow is probably capable of consuming 2.7% of her body weight. So nutrient requirements and actual absolute amounts vary pretty drastically amongst stages of production. But if we do our best to optimize intake or maximize intake, from a percent of diet standpoint, they're not largely or grossly different.
Okay. Do you believe that giving cows a supplement to their diet in the spring when they have calves at their side, even though they're on grass?
So I think to answer that question, it depends on the productivity of the cow and the nutrient density or concentration of the grass. So there are situations we need to supplement a cow with a calf at side, but I think that really comes down to knowing the performance of our cow and knowing our forage base. Oftentimes, I'd say the average cow probably doesn't need supplement when she's on good, lush, spring growth fescue.
Okay. We talked about earlier about how we measure our performance, right? So what would you say are those key metrics that producers should be measuring?
Oh, so if I got to pick three, they would need to know what their cow weighs. They would need to know how she's reproducing, and they would need to know how big of a calf she's weaning. If I got to choose five, I would want body condition score. The sky's the limit. In a data-driven environment that we're in today, I mean, we look at all of our downstream users, feedlot, backgrounders all making data-driven decisions, and yet we get on the cow-calf side, and our 1,400-pound cow weighs 1,200 pounds on paper. I'm not sure when the last time she had a calf was, and that's not all producers by any stretch, but I think we need to know our numbers better, because we can't know where we're going if we don't know where we've been.
We're at. Yeah.
Right.
What are those things that we can do to gain more from our environment? You talked about our environment's kind of always been the same, but how can we gain more?
Yeah, so it all starts with the forage, right? And I'm big on forage. So starts at soil health, soil fertility. If we look at a lot of practices that are applied anymore, rotational grazing, we can improve stocking rate and forage utilization. Extending the grazing season, so getting more out of it, mixing in different forage species. But all in all, I think it all comes down to matching the right cow to our environment and knowing everything about her and knowing what we want her to do, and developing our forage program around her.
Knowing our environment, knowing the forages that we have, how accountable do you hold that cow in those lesser quality nutrients?
Well, I think if she's not getting what she needs,
Yep.
I don't think we can hold her accountable at all.
Okay.
If we're letting her slip a body condition score from calving to breeding, I consider that the producer's fault or our management's fault,
Yep.
not the cow's fault. And so part of that is the cow's fault. Maybe she's a little too capable, a little too high performance for the environment. But again, that comes back to genetic selection and did we fit the wrong cow into the wrong environment?
Waiting on another question here. Is it good to provide those protein tubs all year round, or is there a better time of year?
Yeah, so, on my operation, I'm probably not going to spend the money on a protein tub year round. They do get expensive, especially in times when we consider that cow wouldn't need protein. So understanding our grass base, so when is our grass good? When is it meeting the protein requirements of that cow? And when is it not? And so those windows, so I would tell you on a cool season grass pasture like fescue, so we get really good growth in the spring, and we also get a nice another flush of growth in the fall. That fall growth we can actually stockpile and then maintain quality in it clear into the winter months. And so that cow probably needs a tub the very worst in the middle of summer when the fescue is really rank and really mature. I see very few tubs sitting around then.
Yeah. Is the cost of the forage analysis worth it, and why?
Yeah, so the cost of a forage analysis is worth its weight in gold. So you're looking at, probably $16 to $20 to run a forage analysis. So let's say if we've got 20 cows, that is $1 a cow a year, right, to run a forage test. With that $1 a cow a year, everybody looks at it from a cost increasing standpoint. So they don't analyze their forage because they think that somebody's going to tell them they're going to have to buy some nutrients and they don't like spending any money, right? And it could just be equally the other way. So if you're buying that protein tub or giving them cubes in the wintertime or supplement them with whatever you think, if we ran that test and realized, hey, my forage is good to meet the needs of this mid-gestation cow, and I might want to focus my supplement dollars when she calves and when my forage isn't adequately meeting her needs. And then we can take what would have been a $50 budget over 150 days and make it a $50 budget or $40 budget for 45 days, do a better job of taking care of the cow, do a better job of spending our money on where she needs it the most.
I sometimes think producers don't realize that they're going to recoup that money back, making sure she's got everything she needs, whether it's environment or nutrition.
Yeah, I think if we're doing our job as nutritionists and consultants in the industry and we're providing value for your operation, nutrition shouldn't be looked at as a cost, right? It should be looked at as an investment.
Investment in return.
Yep. an investment that provides a return. And so if you are spending money on nutrition and not understanding what return on the investment you're getting, I would start asking some questions and learn where my ROI is and maybe where I could save or where I need to spend more to perform, get my cow to perform.
Mm-hmm. And with the forage analysis, you know what you're lacking, so you're not spending the money where you don't need it.
Correct.
to.
Yeah, we're not providing a blanket throw over of our nutrition program. We know what's there and we know what we need to feed.
Exactly. If weaning weights aren't getting higher, would you reduce the frame size of the cow? Would that be beneficial to help with the amount of feed and costs associated with that?
Yeah, so I don't know that necessarily it means reducing the frame size of the cow. I think we need to put pressure on cow weight versus the weight of calf that she's weaning. So if we are an operation that's seeing stagnant weaning weight and our cow keeps getting bigger, we probably need to ask the question, because if we know if that cow's getting bigger, she's producing a bigger carcass, so somebody's generating more revenue on that calf, it's not us. So we either need to come back to an optimal size cow that produces the maximum amount of pounds weaned calf for her body weight, or we need to keep making her bigger and retain ownership in her. I mean, there's no, if you look across the fence, nobody does anything the same, and there's good reason for that. Different things work for different people, and I want to challenge people's thought process, not necessarily their current. You could get the best performance in the world and wean a 700-pound calf and do great. I'm just challenging everybody to think through what they're doing and if they can make any improvements to it.
I think this is the million-dollar question of the night, but what is the best way to match the cow to the certain environment and nutrients that you have available?
So the best way is understanding the nutrients that you have available. So are you in central Iowa and can raise 300 bushel corn? Are you in New Mexico grazing shrubs? Or are you in South Missouri grazing some pretty rough fescue? And I don't think we can recommend what kind of cow you need without knowing what the nutrient resources in your environment are. So it all goes back to forage testing, understanding what you've got, and then we can tell you or advise you past that.
Gotcha. With that, I have one last question. Should we consider different regional nutrient requirements versus what the NRC says?
The problem is, so I don't think that is a bad question. Should we consider regional nutrient requirements? The problem is now we've got all of our resources pooled, and we are lagging at best in determining nutrient requirements of cows. If we divided those resources into 5 regions, then I think we would fall even further behind our genetic progress. And so, although I do think it would be great if by region, because we know what influences energy requirements, right? It's temperature, it's rainfall, humidity, and it's the forages that are made in that environment. So it makes a lot of sense to have regional nutrient requirements, but I don't think that we would be able to pool the resources to get that done.
Yeah, and it's a lot different from one part of your region to the other.
Yes, yep.
With that, like I said, that was the last question, but if we didn't get to your question, a Cargill team member will be in touch and get with you personally on those questions. So Wesley, I want to thank you for joining us on behalf of Cargill, and I want to thank you, our viewers, for joining us this evening for Evolution of the Cow, Evolution of Nutrition, presented by Cargill. I hope that some of this information was helpful to you and you take something back and look at how you can incorporate that in your own operations. So at the conclusion of this webinar, we will have a survey. Your browser will be directed to a survey. The Angus University team would appreciate any feedback that you have for us. It helps the team in coming up with future content. A full recording of this webinar will be made available on the Angus website under the News and Announcements section tomorrow. And our webinar series is going to conclude. We're going to take a break through the summer months, but Angus University is going to hold a variety of lunch and learn sessions. These are short sessions, designed to answer those frequently asked questions about association programs and services. So join us next Tuesday at 12 o'clock Central Time for the first Angus Link session. In June, we'll cover AIMS. In July, succession planning. And then in August, we'll go through AHIR requirements for feet, udder, and body condition scoring. So again, for more information on the Lunch and Learn sessions, you can visit the Angus website. But with that, again, I would like to thank you for joining us this evening, and we hope you found this beneficial.